Hey everyone, welcome to the Torvus podcast. My name is Ari. I'm joined by Jason and Alex once again, and this is your gateway to the 80s genre, movies, mayhem, martial arts, motivation, you name it, and we will cover it. Today we're going to be talking about remakes and reboots and why they suck and they're totally shitty. And we're also going to talk about Kong vs. Godzilla 2021, which is a remake slash reboot, which sucks. And we're going to talk about that too. So let's start with Godzilla and let's start with Kong, the remake. We've all watched it, and I want to get your opinion on what you thought of it. So, Alex, we're going to start with you. What'd you think compared to the other monster films that you've seen?
The first 20 minutes of it, I was impressed with the special effects. Like I said earlier, they had kind of caught up to the time to really do a Godzilla movie and to really make it visually spectacular. And the sounds were pretty good, and some of the explosions in the initial fight scene I thought was pretty cool. But then it just quickly starts to fall apart as soon as they introduce any sort of plot. The characters were awful. The conclusion, massive spoilers here because I'm going to dive right into it.
Good.
The conclusion with Kong being some sort of apex king that has Thor's Stormbreaker Godzilla radiation absorbing battle axe that he pulls out of his throne from the under part of the earth. It was so confusing, so much BS. And then to top that off, like we talked about in the last episode, Mechagodzilla, one of my favorite all-time Godzilla matchups, they just bastardized it, just totally butchered it. It was some evil dude's invention, and they used the whatever legend sauce and poured it in there. Oh wow, yeah, now he's working. Oh man, now he's got the mind link to one of the other monsters that Godzilla's defeated, and now it's running amok. It was it was just absolutely atrocious. It was terrible.
Yeah, the plot for it was horrible. The human story was so terrible. You could actually just compact it down to maybe about 20 minutes of them just fighting, and then that would be it. And then they added, the storyline was, you're right, it was horrible. So Jay, what do you think when you kind of went through it?
Well, big face palm, what the fuck? The special effects, they had the details and stuff. So there's nothing, the people that are working on the things are technically good. They can do the facial expressions, they can make the little hairs and the details and the cool lighting and stuff like that. So those technical people are doing a great job. But the big problem with doing things is you need the most important person in any movie is the fucking writer. Not the fucking celebrity, not the director. It's the fucking writer. Get a good writer, then you go down, you get a fucking good director, then get some good fucking actors, and then get the other things. But you can't go the other way around and you cheap out. And I don't even know who wrote the thing, but come on, guys. It was like some rich billionaire kids playing in the background with his other rich billionaire friends that are fans of wrestling, which is okay. Hey, I like wrestling too. But when they're fighting in the city here, it's okay, and the bang against the ropes, and boom, we'll corner buckle this guy, and it's but you're not even treating the buildings like buildings, and you're not even doing it. And like I was saying last time with the special effects, if you don't do them cheesy enough, it doesn't work. You got these super realistic looking things, but you're doing them in a super cheesy way where they're not acting like buildings when you're climbing on them, breaking them, falling into them. If you're going to do something that's cartoonish and outlandish, make it look that way. Don't make it look realistic and then do unrealistic things. It just doesn't work.
You remember how I said that they need to power up Kong in order to have him hold any kind of match.
Yeah, and they literally did. You called it. I was thinking that when I was watching, I was like, that's just what Alex was talking about, was powering him up.
Yeah,
and they did it in the most bullshit way, with this axe. Give the monkey an axe to fight Godzilla. Wait, the axe will absorb his breath attack, which is like, could you imagine if Godzilla's like blasting you and you've got like this axe to block the whole thing with, and he just like absorbs it and then smashes him and throws all that energy right back at him in a way that hurts him. It's just, oh.
So let's get into that specifically. So if you're talking about the axe, right? So it absorbs Godzilla's breath weapon, and then Kong uses it back on Godzilla, who you would figure would be immune to his own breath weapon. So why would it even be there? So that's the first thing that's super stupid. Mm-hmm. The second thing is we're talking about powering up Kong. In the Kong movie, he was a certain height. However, for the Godzilla movie, they had to make him about 2.5, 3 times bigger. So he actually grew since the last movie. So they would be on the same par.
Well, actually, he was bigger because he's sitting there, you know, giving the fucking noogies and shit there in the fucking ring of the city. Pretty much, like, how many times did he grab his head and he's like, you know?
Also, like the first fight scene, which, like I said, was the best one, but still not great, where they're on sort of using the battleships to fight each other, right? And you just know that Godzilla is beyond F in the A, because they're like in the middle of the ocean. Like he's got battleships to stand on, and Godzilla's just plowing through these things, and they're like firing like their salvo of missiles, and he doesn't care at all. He's just swimming right through that, goes up, and he just like beats the crap out of him, and then he's like, oh no, never mind, it's fine. Like I don't know, like it was so like it's kind of like the whole Justice League Batman v Superman. Like, how do you fuck it up that badly? Like, I don't understand how you present that script and people are like, I want to get on board with this and be a part of this project. It was that bad.
It's like a film school challenge. It's like, except it's the other way around. Like, you've got this great idea, now go ahead and fuck it up.
Yeah, totally.
How do you do it?
And the thing about Godzilla is a sea monster. Most people don't think that, but he actually is. So he's more powerful in the sea than he is anywhere else. And I think, was it in this one that if they did a close-up on him and you can see gills on him? I don't know if it was this film or the last one, but it's the first time I've noticed that. And when they were fighting on the battleships, totally awesome in many ways, because it's hilarious, you know, the aircraft carriers. But I'm just like, how much do these guys weigh? And I'm surprised that these things aren't capsizing like immediately, and they weren't, right? I'm like,
and they're both standing on it.
Exactly, both of them are standing on the aircraft carrier. I'm like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I want to phone up like some.
Wouldn't it be cooler with toys? Like if they were models and the guys in rubber suits on model toys in a swimming pool with shit. It would, because of cheesiness, it would go together and it would add instead of taking it away.
Well, I think this is the problem with Godzilla in particular, because we were so used to guys in suits and we knew it was cheesy and all that shit. But now that the CGI it's everything CGI, it's like, well, we're going to make it look as realistic as possible, and it takes away from the absurdity of the film. We all know it's a guy in suits, but then when you're trying to make it so realistic, it's kind of like it takes away the fun factor, I think, from the movie a little bit.
It makes it too serious. Like, so like it could have been a film that was a little more whimsical, but they were pretty serious about like stuff getting destroyed and everybody being all upset, and the weird plots with all the different characters and the little girl that could sign to Kong, which was just like very, very weird. Like, she was deaf, so she wasn't afraid of him, and that's how she learned to sign with him. It was like, well, Alex, what was going on with that?
Okay, well, let's be honest. I mean, this is my opinion on it, and I don't know if you guys will agree with, but a lot of movies today are introducing either marginalized or people who aren't represented in movies, which I think is a great idea, but they do throw them in, and it's like, well, how are we going to put this into the film? Having the deaf girl is a nice touch, but it's almost like they just put in the deaf girl because they wanted something like a deaf girl to have it. It didn't really help the story.
Right.
Like when you force it in, it's in there for its own sake rather than something to
rather than naturally occurring.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what Jason's talking about. Like, it starts with the writer. Like, a good story that's written well then you usually can't go wrong.
It's like you're like, I mean, here's 2 seconds of thought. Oh my God, if you're gonna have deaf sign language thing, it's like, okay, there's a big loud scream, everyone's deafened, there's no way for them to communicate. How are they gonna get this one vital piece of information across that they need to? Oh my God, the little girl taught them sign language and saves the day. There you go. There's a better thing.
So who in the end won that? Kong or Godzilla?
Well,
We all lost.
technically, yeah. Well, that first of all, that 100%. But technically, Kong kicked Godzilla's ass. Then Mechagodzilla rolls in and starts beating Kong up, and then it takes Kong and Godzilla teaming up. But all Godzilla does is charge Kong's axe with his breath weapons. They can do another super smash and destroy the Mechagodzilla.
I don't know, Alex, because
it's very video game.
Didn't Godzilla, when I think was it the first meeting or the second meeting, he ended up standing on Kong and like literally like he alpha him. He was like, he roared in his face, and it's like, you can't do anything. I busted you up pretty bad, like hurt his shoulder and everything like that, right?
I would say that, I mean, we gotta suspend disbelief where you gotta suspend disbelief, and like we're talking about Godzilla and King Kong here. There's a lot of scientific shit that just ain't right with the premise itself. But I didn't particularly have a huge problem with that, especially because, like we talked about in the last episode, Kong is like starting to get this sort of power up from interacting with electricity in like a positive way. Like, it doesn't tend to hurt him as much as you would think it would hurt a giant gorilla. Like, he's got some sort of I don't know, gorillas can handle electricity better. I don't think that's a fact, but I think that's something that they're just trying to put into his mythos, is that
electrical thing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of just like a defibrillation, like, yeah, they could, if his heart stopped because Godzilla like stood on his chest, which could probably stop his heart, you could,
just make it go really slow that a little girl can tell.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't stopped.
Exactly the same way. Just like whenever anybody's having any sort of even abnormal arrhythmia, you can put one of those automatic defibrillators on them, and it'll tell you like when to shock or not to shock, or how that will work, right? I mean, you don't want to shock someone that's alive because you can kill them, but that's how I don't have a huge problem with that part of it. It was more the next part.
I just wanted to check with you because there was the lightning clouds in the other one, but this time it's man that steps in and does it, sort of like nuking Godzilla to get him going, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't have a huge problem with that, because again, I think that they've tied Kong and electricity together. I don't really know enough about it.
I think it's just really, you're just a shill for Big Electric, and that's really. You're just bought off by Big Electric, so I think you're just going to say anything that's pro-electric.
Electricity does everything, man. Just use it for everything.
So the funny thing about Kong and Godzilla, this is really kind of the geek factor here, and I'm going to appeal to the people who love science, but because of the size and their weight, they actually wouldn't be able to hold themselves up. Their legs would buckle and they'd blow out. Their knees would blow out because of the size and how many hundreds of tons they are. And so there's I don't know the formula and how much it actually is, but they were just saying in order for Godzilla to actually be mobile like he is, it would be impossible because of obviously his size and his weight. So I always find that funny.
Radiation bones, dude.
There you go. See, you can explain everything away.
It's like you got to suspend disbelief in certain parts of it. And like, if you can, I think that you could make up enough. Like, we don't, like, sure, with what we know of science, you're absolutely right. But even human beings, we know very little on the grand scheme of things. And there's a lot of, we're still making elements. We're still coming up with new compounds. We're still, scratching the surface. Like, you go back like 300 years and people don't have electricity, or like, there's a lot of recently discovered technology that people really like to use to judge science fiction when we are barely scratching the surface. Like we talked about in some of our earlier episodes, like the inspiration that people will pull from science fiction, like cell phones and, you know, wrist communicators and stuff like that, right? All that stuff would have previously been like, oh, that's bullshit, you couldn't make that.
So
right.
it's really,
but again, it
we did
ties
it.
into the realistic thing. We're only questioning these things because they make them look so realistic. When they're
Yes.
sitting there with their toys and their rubber suits, you don't go, well, you know, you just go with it and have fun. Your brain doesn't stop to go, wait a minute.
But that's because they really did it though. Like that's the thing with special effects. Like, so this is where CGI can go so terribly, is because your brain can directly reject that, as opposed to like shitty special effects where something's actually happening. If you're taking a camera and you're just filming something, whatever you did, that was real, and your brain can undeniably recognize that. Like in The Thing, when they're doing all those like flash special effects, when it's all bubbling and boiling and whatnot, that was real. Whether or not that looks like an alien going through whatever that process is, that is a whole other side debate. The truth of it is that they really did that in real life and just filmed it.
yeah.
So I think that's the difference between like a CGI special effect and, I don't know the movie terminology, but like a prop special effect or animatronic or whatever you want to call it, right? And that's why I think that if you look at like Grogu, Baby Yoda, I think he gets such a huge effect because he is that animatronic, and they do have like a whole team of guys running him because they're actually filming that little cute thing moving around.
Yeah.
And your brain just takes that in and recognizes that as a real thing, as opposed to struggling with the immensity of it or the faults in the CGI.
But it's real enough, but not too real. That's the thing, is it hits that sweet spot there.
You know, it's I was rewatching Neil deGrasse Tyson on Hot Ones, and he was talking
One of the best episodes.
Fantastic. So Sean, the host, he asked him, he's like, hey, what movie and what TV show do you think represents science the best for science fiction? And Neil deGrasse Tyson said The Martian, which I actually haven't seen. He says it was very, very good science-wise. And then he says The Simpsons, that was the other one, that they're really good about sticking to real scientific things in the episodes, which I find interesting. And, you know, like science fiction turns into science fact a lot of times, and vice versa. We've talked about this with Star Trek, where they had communicators, which is like, oh, it's a cell phone, or they had a tricorder, which is basically an iPad, right? And so these things have changed over time, you know, which one begat which. And which brings me to kind of a segue here. When we started this episode, we talked about what's the difference between a reboot and a remake, and why are so many of them horrible. I would say the majority of the remakes or reboots that I've ever seen, more remakes, have been horrible. I would say 85%, 90% of the remakes I've ever seen are completely shitty. And I think the reason they suck is because we have such a nostalgia for the movies that we remember, and they're in our heart and in our minds. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're going to remake that. And you're like, really? You're touching that? You're going to remake it. So, for example, we all have a movie that we may love, and there's like, it should never be remade. And then some of them that are. So we're talking about Star Trek. Let's start there. So Jason is going to have some issues on the whole Star Trek thing, and so am I in many ways. So they remade Star Trek, but they also did a reboot as well. So what's the difference between a remake and a reboot? A remake is taking the original story from the original movie and remaking it in modern times. A reboot is taking the characters and start telling a new story, but based on the original characters. So it's not a retelling of the original story. Some movies do remake and reboot at the same time. They kind of have a combination thing, and some are different. So when you look at Star Trek, the original Star Trek series, and I'm not talking about the Next Generation stuff. I'm talking about the episodes with Kirk and Spock and all that stuff. And then they did the remake with the new actors. Now, Jason, I'm going to let you run with this on why you hate it, and or maybe you like some things. I don't know. So go ahead.
What a fucking abomination. I know. I mean, the Khan one was like such a classic. You had the original Star Trek episode, Space Seed. Then you had the Wrath of Khan,
Uh-huh.
which was just a fucking brilliant way to continue it and move it forward. And yet still it stayed true to the original. Everything was true to it. But then you get this fucking remake and they're like, oh, let's take the idea of this thing. Oh, let's use the name Khan. Let's use the name Star Trek, and let's do our own thing. And we've got an idea for a plot that's better. And let's throw out the rest of this shit and throw our garbage thing from the fucking bullshit script that we couldn't possibly get anyone to fucking make. But we must have been sucking someone else's dick to get in here to do it for fucking Star Trek, so that you're like, okay, great. Well, we'll just jam our bullshit idea in and steal some names that people like. Do it. So why do remakes suck? Because some jackass goes, hey, look at all you fans, you guys really like this stuff, and if we tell you it's the same stuff, you're dumb enough to actually buy it and watch it, and we'll just care about making the money. We don't care about actually doing it with heart. Whereas the Wrath of Khan was done with heart. It went back to the original. It was true to the original. Again, we went over Star Trek Continues. Go back and watch that episode.
Uh-huh.
They go back and they move forward with the original Star Trek, but they say true to it. It's the heart, the soul, all that stuff is there. It's not just like, oh, I've got a better idea to do something completely different that has nothing to do with this, but we'll just use the name and steal that, jam it in there. It's a disgrace. That was not Khan. It's why would you name? Use a Joe Blow, whatever you want to have, and throw it in there, but don't desecrate an old classic character like that. I mean, fucking Fantasy Island guy must be fucking rolling around in his grave for that thing. It's just like
Ricardo
oh
Montalban.
God.
Yes. So I guess
I know, but I like to.
I know. So I think that Jason really makes a good point that the reason that we're so offended is because we love the original characters, and then when you have a new actor step into that role, it deviates from what we remember. So
Not the actor's fault, though. Let me be clear. Like I say,
No.
it's the writer's fault,
it
then
is
the director's fault, then the
Although,
actor's fault.
guys-
The actor's just generally just doing their job.
Although, guys, they did a little time loopy thing at the very beginning of the remake of the first Star Trek. They did that scene where Captain Kirk's dad gets attacked by the Romulan ship that is coming out of this wormhole.
Yeah.
And that's because in the future, that Romulan ship was chasing down Spock's little science ship or whatever.
Yep.
And he dropped some unstable particle in his, or it got loose or something. Anyway, there was a wormhole that opened up and sucked them backwards in time, and they got stuck there, right?
Yep.
And then that, like the butterfly effect, and that fucked everything up. That destroyed the whole timeline. And then Captain Kirk was a little asshole and you didn't go through the academy the same way. So
Right.
I get what you're saying, and I totally agree with you that those movies, again, I think, to paraphrase, they're taking an idea and an established idea, and they've purchased the rights to said idea. Then they're going to rebrand it and resell it to make profits. And profits are the driving force here.
That's
And they've
what
said,
they're interested
I've invested, whatever, 100, or I don't know, let's say it costs like $10 million to get the Star Trek rights for whoever made that. I don't know. I'm just throwing that number out there. I have no concept of what it was. And then they said, okay, now we've got a starting point, and we're just going to rebrand it. We're going to market the hell out of it. We're going to amp it up with special effects. We're going to do the trailers, and we're going to sell the hell out of this thing for
We're just gonna
the
slap
next
it out,
generation.
slug on a stick, out it goes.
For the people who have never seen the original Star Trek, they're targeting the first time you guys saw Star Trek. How old were you guys?
Well, I was a kid. I was very young.
Yeah, a kid. Yeah.
Like, yeah, and you would have no idea, right? And so then my little brother, who's 16, would have been watching it for the first time when he was like, I don't know, like 10 or 11 or something. Like, that's his Star Trek, because he's never seen the old ones.
But
because the old ones had.
then you don't
Yep.
need to throw Khan in it, because your little brother
Totally.
doesn't know who Khan is. So what the fuck are you doing bringing that in there? Leave it the fuck out. If you're going to bring it forward, do it with justice. 500 fights, man. You got to fucking put the time in. You can't just go slap
Totally.
that thing, rip it off the shelf, and fucking crank it out there. You can't do that. You got to go like the Star Trek Continues guy. That guy put his heart and soul in all those people in that show. That you can see the years of love and creation. Boy, I'd love to it's just like night and day difference between the two.
Okay, let me interject for a second. So I'm kind of on the opposite of where Jason is, believe it or not. Although I did not like the new Khan story, I agree with Alex that they did the science and the new multiverse very well, I thought, on why things turn out the way they did. Because we always talk about, you're on the stream and all of a sudden it breaks off and you're doing that whole Mandela effect. And that's how I looked at it. I know it's not the same actors. I know they don't have the same backstory. Yes, there'll be a new Khan in this new multiverse from the other one. I understand that too. However, should they have gone over that story? I agree with Jason saying no, they should have left it. It didn't do anything other than, hey, here's a name that everyone knows.
You took away, by using the name, you took away, you didn't add to it. You just did harm. You could have given me any other name and it wouldn't have set off my delicate sensibilities.
Do you know what the worst part is of that, though, Jason? Is they didn't just stop by destroying Khan, because let's face it, I think the first Star Trek remake, when I can't even remember the official title, but I think it did relatively well at the box office. And then they did the new Into Darkness, the Khan one, which I think people watched it, but the critics were quite harsh on it and it didn't do as well. And then they did the Beyond, which they just drove the plane into the ground and then they just kept driving somehow. I don't know how, but they just buried that whole franchise. Like, I don't even think people went and watched that movie because they were like over it after.
So I'm going to, because you brought this up, I looked it up, Alex. So Star Trek Beyond, which was the last one that came out, it was 185 million to make, and it made 343 million at the box office. And then
there you go. They succeeded. They made their money.
Fuck. Business.
But I mean, it's not huge, right? Star Trek franchise, the reboot series. So Star Trek 2009, which was the first one, it made it was 150 million, and it made 385. So again, pretty comparable.
Yeah.
And then what was the other one? We're looking at the Into Darkness, right?
Yeah, Into Darkness. That was the Khan one.
Star Trek. So I wonder how. I think that one probably would have made more money because they used the Khan name.
And Benedict Cumberbatch,
yes,
like a pretty well-known actor at that time, making a lot of great movies.
He's
and
great
again,
actor.
like
I love him.
Yeah, like it just.
So again, not the actor's fault.
This is true. So Into Darkness. My phone is going very slow here.
I just think that the worst part about when they redo a series like that and they're going to change things, we've already seen them do this in another media industry. It's been done for years before in the comic industry, right? With the whole multiverse. And it's kind of my biggest problem with a lot of the way that DC does things, because their multiverse is expansive. Don't get me wrong, Marvel does it too. Like, every comic ever has been rewritten by another guy who was a fan and they wanted to do it differently. So they just did something very similar there, where they've done this Mandela effect and created a split in the timeline because there was, option A or option B, and they chose option B, right? What would happen? The What If series, right? And I don't necessarily have an issue with that. I just have an issue with, like Jason's saying, how the amount of thought that they put into rebranding it and the motivation behind it. I think a lot of the times it's purely financial and not art form. It's not about creating a character and developing a character and saying, like, okay, well, like, let's say, if Captain America wasn't always a goody two shoes, or some of my, one of my favorite DC comics, the Flashpoint one, where the Flash goes back in time and saves his mom. What would happen? Oh, well, he doesn't end up with superpowers, and somehow Bruce Wayne gets killed, and Batman's dad becomes Batman, and he uses a pistol and just murders the hell out of people. Like, it was crazy, and it was this radical takeoff. But it was
Red Son.
It was written within, and it was developed with a lot of thought, and it was meant to further even the main storyline. It wasn't meant to cut it off and to divide it. Another movie series that is also a comic, X-Men. Have you guys seen the new X-Men? So when they did X-Men Days of Future Past, I believe was the title.
Yep.
And they introduced, that was the big timeline split. That was sort of saying goodbye to Captain Picard, and introducing the first class actors as the new standard for what the X-Men were going to be.
But why do they do that? We know the reason, right?
Because
they age
the
out.
actors get old,
right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a way to carry on the thing. And so Marvel's going to do it, and you're going to see it. I'm going to just throw the number out. So Into Darkness was 185 million, and it made 467 million. So
it was the best one.
It was the best one out of all of them. But to go back to your point, you're right. They have these actors who age out, so they need new actors. And you're going to see, like in Marvel, eventually Wanda and Vision, I mean, they're phase 4, phase 5, but they're going to get older. They're going to get new things. So the question is, do we do a remake of Iron Man?
So here's my thing. Iron Man is going to be one of the heaviest ones. Another one that's going to be, I think, before Iron Man, because they're going to have to leave that for a while. I think it's going to be Wolverine. We're going to be introduced to a new Wolverine who isn't Hugh Jackman. That's going to be pretty big shoes to fill there for sure.
Yep.
And I think that's probably going to be the most up and coming one, because they kind of fucked it all up, because even when they did Days of Future Past and they introduced X-Men First Class, they still had Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. So you're watching it and you're like, wait, what the fuck? The X-Men guy, or Professor X, Xavier, looks totally different. But then there's fucking Wolverine, and he's exactly the same. But whatever. It worked out.
That's Wolverine, right?
I know.
He's not supposed to look different.
It worked out, but it was also I think that they again, the profits were what drove the X-Men Days of Future Past, and then into First Class, and again with Apocalypse, right? It was retellings of these older stories. And again, it's tough, right? Because I get that the film industry, at the end of the day, it is a business and it is about making money, but it just sucks when they just butcher these already awesome storylines to create.
But Alex, the reason that they used Hugh Jackman, and this is totally geeking out here, is that's totally acceptable and logical, because in one of the Mandela effects in these branches, you could have everyone different except Hugh Jackman, right? In another universe, it'd be a new guy. So I know what you're saying. Obviously, they did use him because he was a moneymaker, and everyone just loves. But they've talked about recasting Wolverine for years, and I keep seeing these images of hey, this is the new Wolverine, and this is the new Wolverine. I don't know when they're going to do it, but I think you're right. That's going to be the first one that they touch upon.
Yeah, and what I prefer though is, especially when we're talking about these massive movie franchises, where if we look at Spider-Man, so what we saw with Spider-Man when it was Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and then into Andrew Garfield, the reason, and I think the Andrew Garfield series didn't do as well as it could have, was because they kind of did a remake of the first Spider-Man movie when they redid The Amazing Spider-Man, just compared to Spider-Man. That, in my mind, was not a reboot. It was a remake, because it was very much, oh, here we go. He's in fucking high school again.
It's
gets
an
bit
origin
by the
story.
spider, does the whole thing, right? It was almost exactly the same, just introduced a couple different bad guys, right?
Yes.
But then when they did Homecoming with Tom Holland, amazing, because they just skipped all that shit and they said, you know what, we're going old school, way back to the original comics. We're not going to do the origin story. We're also even going to do, for the true fans, it really, one of the things that set me off about that movie was they left out Spider-Man's Spidey senses, because he had to develop those. He hadn't learned how to understand them yet. And I was so pissed off when I watched that first movie. I was like, has no one seen Spider-Man? Did they forget about this? But I still, to this day, I'm not sure if they just had so much flack that they had to go back and put that in, or if it was part of their plan the whole time. So the jury's still out for me on that one. But as far as a remake, I would say that I don't know. I don't know where you guys stand with the original Spider-Man. Like, what's your thoughts on Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man? Tobey Maguire versus Andrew Garfield.
So for me, Tobey Maguire I liked, Andrew Garfield I didn't like, Tom Holland I really like. But this is where the writing, and this is where Jason fucking hits the nail on the head. For the new Spider-Man that's coming out, they were like, well, how can we make this awesome? Well, they're having all three actors in the next film because they're doing Into the Spider-Verse and they're having each of those actors come in. And I'm like, genius. So that's how you do it. That's how you do good writing, and it explains things and everyone gets their little taste, and it's not retelling, it's Tobey Maguire. Now it's Holland. Like, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So they're doing a live version of Into the Spider-Verse, basically.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I haven't been keeping up with things, but yeah, that would be that's a great solution.
And this is where I don't think writers and comic book writers get enough credit. Years ago, they just discounted comic book writers as, wasn't literature. They didn't consider it literature, but it's actually...
You couldn't write and you couldn't draw, so you did comics, which is like kind of both.
Exactly. But it's been proven that comics are actually considered literature. They're really well written. Yeah. They're stories that go on longer than anything that's ever been written. I mean, we're talking about 50, 60, 70 years, a continuation story. Obviously, new writers come in, but think about the development over hundreds of issues. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like modern mythology, basically. Like, the myths are not... If you look at classical mythology, it's not like they were consistent in the stories. There is reboots and remakes within them and stuff, but yet there's a common thread that sort of
if you look at the Greeks and the Romans, it's just the same shit, different, like, that's Greek 2.0 is Roman. Like, or planets, they shouldn't be Jupiter and
but yet
Neptune.
they're clearly different
Zeus.
writers, because the Romans have a certain way. It's a little different than the Greeks, just like you have a different comic writer and things. So there's interesting things.
But that's like that for anything, like, Norse mythology is pulling from, and then Egyptian mythology. Yeah. They all have, they're either pulling from each other or they're rediscovering the same thing, because we all have a common thing involved. It's like everyone dies. We need to have a god of death. So all these different cultures are having these things. You look at Christianity, which pulled a ton of stuff from pagan culture.
Christianity would get its ass sued. Like, in the modern world, Christianity's ass would be sued fucking into oblivion. Like, fuck, Disney would be all over that ass. Just like, forget it. They just ripped everything off.
Yeah, I mean, but that's how a lot of storytellers do their thing, right? So
totally.
To answer your question, I really love Tom Holland. If we're going to talk about just Spider-Man real quick,
I didn't even put him as there as an option, because one, I think technically it is a reboot based off of the definition, and two, because that's a given. So between
Tobey Maguire,
Garfield, and Tobey Maguire,
I would say Tobey Maguire. But the other thing is, I think it's an insult to geeks and people who love comics to keep telling an origin story. Like, who's coming to see these films? Are you telling me that people don't know Spider-Man's origin story? Yes, there's a few, but I would say the majority are like, yeah, we know he got bit by a spider. Let's have a new story.
Especially as a fan, right?
It's insulting to keep doing this, and it's fucking boring. And as Jason and you pointed out, it's a cash grab, and I'm tired of seeing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is what I think the MCU did so well, and they're continuing to do as we're moving into phase 5, but that's kind of been all blown apart with COVID. It's a very weird time right now, but if you look at the current media that they're putting out on Disney Plus, like WandaVision and The Winter Soldier, these are great continuations of stories that draw from comics. Yeah. Again, I almost have to call them like media reboots, because they're drawing directly from existing comics. So that to me is something that we have to watch for when Disney's coming out and really setting a precedent in terms of the Marvel series. I think they're doing it so very well. And I think it's going to be really cool as we see potentially a new Iron Man come out. I think that's going to be their next biggest hurdle. And drawing the X-Men into the franchise as well.
Yeah. What were you gonna say, Jay?
except where Marvel has failed horribly with remaking and redoing things, because one of the biggest Marvel things, and modern people won't realize this, the Fantastic Four is fucking huge in the Marvel universe. And if something needs to be remade, redone, rebooted, whatever you want to call it, it's the Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four is fantastic. There's so many great things in there with Doctor Doom and Silver Surfer. Like there's so much stuff within that chunk of the universe. The Avengers isn't that big. That side of things has got overly focused on, and the other side has just been banned. I know it's all this corporate legal bullshit that caused it, but it's, if you want to get something that needs to be redone, sometimes things are remade and rebooted that don't need to be, but that's something that really needs to be done justice.
So here's
back to the original.
Okay, so we both want to talk about. Okay,
Whoa.
So the Fantastic Four is a great example of a reboot and a remake that it sucked again, and it sucked again. So the original Fantastic Four, they had one that came out in the early 90s. Or the 80s even. I don't know, it was the 80s probably. So there's the 1994 version of the Fantastic Four, which came out. Then they had a reboot, which was the 2005 version. They had a sequel that came out, which was Rise of the Silver Surfer. And then in 2015, they did a reboot again, and they changed some of the characters. If you guys remember, I think it was in the 2005 version, the Human Torch was Chris Evans, Captain America.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's hilarious that they reused him, but they never got it right. And Jason's right. Fantastic Four is as big as the Avengers.
I just have to say, not Marvel technically. When making these films, absolutely, it is a Marvel storyline and
Sony
concept.
that did it.
It was sold,
but that's
to
the corporate
Horizon
legal
Studios.
bullshit. The Avengers is like sideshow shit compared to Fantastic Four. Avengers got big, but and like X-Men was the new fuckers that came on the scene and stuff. But Fantastic Four was the big thing.
But this is where the movie studios fuck up the franchise. And Alex, you're right. So it's who's in control. The reason the MCU is so good is because look who's at the helm of that. It's not
Marvel.
It's right. It's Marvel, and it's people who are passionate about the storytelling. Look at the Mandalorian, and look at the Star Wars series, and Jon Favreau. He is an absolute fan, so he's taking care of this. It's not just like I want to make money. They're making money because it's amazing writing, and he cares, and you can totally tell. So when Fantastic Four comes back into the fold, which it is, I think they'll nail it.
Totally. Yeah. I think they have a couple of obstacles to jump over. Obviously, when you absolutely destroy a franchise, like when you think Fantastic Four, I do think back to Chris Evans as Johnny Blaze and Jessica Alba. Oh man, it was just Johnny Storm. It was brutal.
Yes.
And I was
right.
like the prime target, the prime age for that. And I was like, what was that? Like, that was garbage.
Right. So that's the opposite. Instead of taking something, well, I mean, the original comics are good, but from the movie point of view, instead of having a good movie and then remaking it, making it worse, you've got something bad that needs to be remade to something better. Sometimes you get something that's good that doesn't need to be remade. Why bother? But that's just kind of the opposite, where it needs a remake.
Yeah. So let's do a Torvus prediction. What do we think is going to happen? Are they going to remake the Fantastic Four and do an origin story and reintroduce the characters and do a clean slate with it? Or are they just going to toss them in as already established things, kind of like they did with Spider-Man and Homecoming? What do you guys think?
I think they're going to actually,
been long enough.
They have to do a fucking origin story again, because the
and
other
it's okay.
That's
okay. An origin story has been long enough, and people are actually, there's some glimmers in space now. People are starting to get a little bit more interested in Moon and Mars stuff. So the origin story could actually, the time might be coming now, when the things that China and Russia is doing might actually prod the Americans into doing some stuff again.
In
SpaceX
then you get
sponsored.
into it. You get a new space race that really kicks it up a notch. I know they've been doing things, but if you can kick it up that extra notch, and because that's where these things originated in, it's the original space race in the Cold War. So you get that kind of same atmosphere there. It'll be the origin story can kind of make sense, just like you rebooted Iron Man in, and you know which war does he come in and get his heart. You have Watson, which war, you know, does he have his thing where he's a veteran, right? So it's like when you do reboot remakes, there's sometimes where you wait to the right time and you can do it. So I think that right time might be coming, and you would have to start with an origin story because it's been long enough. And if the previous ones are that bad, you want to do a good origin story.
But I disagree with you, Jason. You said, you know, you think it's been long enough since the last one. So this is my problem. They're doing remakes way too quick. Like Spider-Man was a prime example.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Spider-Man, like the second one, I'm like, why are you remaking this? Why aren't you just doing the next movie? And I don't even know fucking actors, but I'm like, what was wrong with the fucking first guy? Did a fucking good job. Why are you replacing this guy? What the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
It's like, just make the next movie. What are you doing retelling things? It's not.
So Tobey Maguire compared to Andrew Garfield, if you really want to get into it, oh man, the part that frustrated me the most was they did the little adder where Spider-Man shoots the webs right out of his wrists, which just pissed me off about the character. I think that's so flawed in so many different ways.
Yes.
And then the Spider-Man 3 is the worst Spider-Man film ever, in my opinion. Ever. Of all the campy ones, of all the stuff I've ever seen, it is the worst one because they absolutely butchered Venom. First of all, they had fucking Eric from That 70s Show. I don't know the actor's name, but play Venom. And the reason he got into Venom was they were going to cast him as Spider-Man, but he got beat out by Tobey Maguire. So then the third one, they said, oh, you know what? This guy was almost Spider-Man. Let's make him Venom. You ever seen the fucking comic? Venom, Eddie Brock is not Peter Parker, not even close. Like, What are you guys thinking? They then did the little emo Spider-Man thing with one of my favorite scenes in terms of absolute like raspberry, hilarious, terrible thing where he's like dancing down the street, snapping his fingers, all jazz hands, emo guy pointing at ladies, and they're like, ooh, look at that guy. It's like, no, that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And then that's not even bad enough. You have to have this terrible Venom. You throw Harry Osborn becoming the Hobgoblin on a snowboard fucking glider thingy. It was unbelievable garbage. And that to me is why I have such a huge problem with the whole Tobey Maguire thing. So I'm really looking forward for him to redeem himself, because I do remember watching the first Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. I got over the wrist thing pretty quick, but the third movie just is unredeemable in my eyes.
It's the production company, Alex. It's the studio that runs it that can destroy a film. And we've seen it so many times where the studio will step in on a film and say, hey, whoa, we want you to add this. And the writers are like, no. And they're like, either you do it or shut down your film. And then they add this stupid shit. So that leads me to other films that are out there that have been remade that are horrible. And typically they're driven by the studios. So we're going to do a kind of cool shit or bullshit section here. We haven't done this. So a Dane's Dungeon. And I'm going to throw out movies to you. And what I want you to say is either it should be remade, it shouldn't be remade, or if it was remade, was it good or was it bad? Okay? So you may not have seen a remake about it, or you may say it's untouchable, they should never do it, that type of thing. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Conan the Barbarian. Jason.
It does not need to be remade. However, Crown of Iron, King Conan, get off your ass, fucking Arnold, before you die. Make that fucking movie, or you're letting the whole world down, you fucking hump.
We get a timeout on some of that. I mean, we love Arnold. Come on, buddy.
I love Arnold. I'm trying to get this movie made because Arnold is awesome. Arnold is awesome, Conan, and you've got the beginning. The beginning doesn't need to be redone. Take all of your effort. You've got Arnold. Arnold was the governor. He has been a modern day king. He is Conan for those things. He needs to do this. It's so perfect. I'm saying it's such a shame that it hasn't been done. Arnold is awesome. It's the awesomeness that makes me pissed off that it hasn't been made.
And they have remade it. They had Jason Momoa do the remake, and so Jason obviously hasn't seen it, so he will never see it because he can't remake that in his eyes. So, Alex, what do you think? Conan the Barbarian.
Hold on, before I got to get this. I got to get this in. There's that bullshit TV thing with the fucking skull. Conan and Friends, that fucking TV show that they had there it was in the early 2000s. You might not, or late 90s or something like that. Anyway, I've sort of blotted most of it out of my mind, but that was a fucking abomination. Go on, Alex. Sorry.
Alex,
Conan. I agree with Jason. They don't need to remake it. I think it was done exactly as it should be, but they should continue it. Now, again, we might run into the issue that because it's not going to be Arnold and reintroducing the character.
It's going to be Arnold because Arnold is old and King Conan's old. Arnold was young. That's why they have to do it now. Before
that's a sequel.
It's too
that's not a remake, Jason. There's the difference.
Yeah.
I know, totally, but you're talking about Conan, so I'm jamming this in there. So go ahead.
I want Conan to continue. I want the stories to continue. I think there should be more movies, and they might have to recast and redo the origin story exactly the same that they did for Fantastic Four. Now, they redid Fantastic Four because it's an absolute piece of garbage. I don't think Conan was, but I think in order to get enough people involved and to generate enough popularity amongst the masses, they might have to recast it. So I am okay with the concept of a remake for Conan, believe it or not.
Okay. So the next one, which has been remade, rebooted, and retold several times, Batman. Alex.
Holy fucking shit. As long as it's not Robert Pattinson, what in the hell? Twilight, like, did we not fuck it up enough with Ben Affleck? Like, it just Christian Bale knocked it out of the park, and then they're like, oh, okay, we can just phone it in for the rest of ever. Like, what is happening?
Okay.
Justice League DC has destroyed Batman for me.
Yes, I agree. Quick question before I go to Jason. Who is your favorite Batman? Is it Christian Bale?
I think overall it's got to be Christian Bale. I mean, you can go way back, and I would say like Adam West, because that was when I like started watching it when I was a kid, and I just loved it. And I wore a Batman costume for literally like 2 years of my life because of Adam West and just how much I loved that ridiculous character.
Okay.
So nostalgic wise, Adam West, but just truly best Batman has got to be Christian Bale for me.
Okay, so do you think that they should continue on recasting, or should they just kill the franchise? What do you think they should do?
I think they need to not have Robert Pattinson do it. I can't really take him seriously in that role. I can't see him being the collected, cold, calculating, brilliant genius, but then also this like schmoozy playboy. Like Batman is a very complicated character because of the simplicity that he is, but the depth that he shows. Okay. Because Batman is a very like base level, very intellectual, like as an entity, as a character, Bruce Wayne / Batman, but it is Bruce Wayne and Batman, and the actor has to be able to play both well.
Okay.
And that's where I think that Robert Pattinson does not make the cut for that. Jason,
Batman. Do you have a favorite Batman? Do you think it should be kept being remade? What's your view on it?
Batman needs to be remade as a series, not as a movie, and you need to start with a re-origin story going back to the comics for year one. But you want to do like Game of Thrones, multiple seasons, big budget, go through you, because it's Batman is a continuation of a story. It's not just a bang, throw your one shot out there. That's where now I think they can take the best of those worlds. So year one Batman's a great comic thing. You get into the thing where they have the earthquake and stuff. That series lead into it. They did some good things with the TV series a little bit there, but that's more like sort of the story of Gotham, and in some ways it's more about Gordon. But anyway, it goes a little bit off the rails in some other parts, but you can kind of try to tell the story of Bruce Wayne right from as a kid through the thing, taking the best of the comic things, but doing it as an extended format that a movie can't really do Batman justice the same way, where Superman is just light and fluffy, whatever, throw at a movie, you go see it, you come back again some years later and see some other thing. But Batman requires more attention for those details, like Alex was saying.
I think you're totally right. So just one sec. I think that Jason's right in this, like making a series, because it's so detailed in the background. He has all these flaws. It can be dark. Like if they did like a Winter Soldier, WandaVision, like it would kill, because he doesn't have that stupid, like, I'm invincible Superman, like fluffy, which we all fucking hate. So Batman would be great as a series, a dark series. Great.
And I think you absolutely nailed it, Jason, in that it would allow you to see the development of the character and the amount of like calculating, and like as you're flipping through comics and stuff, there'll be entire panels with like no sound or anything. It's just showing what Bruce Wayne or Batman is doing, and visually representing what the character is, the quiet contemplation, the amount of detail oriented that character is. You need something more than just a 2 or 3 hour episode to do a whole storyline in. You need to be able to break that down and to have this overall arcing plot that spans over, however many hours are in a season now. There's like 22 episodes. Each episode's like about 45 minutes.
So not even 22
you could go
anymore.
along with that. And there's tons of spin-offs you can do. They're kind of already got them. Like they've got the Pennyworth one, and you could go into the Cat ones, and then you've got him where he's sort of trying to have his own apprentices with Robin and Nightwing, and you could build franchises and spin-offs out of it like crazy. So even if you want to get in on the money thing, you don't have to make up shit. There's so much in the comics. There's so many Bat titles that were out there, and just mine it for the best of, and redo it with someone who has heart and soul in it. Not or just money will come. Just keep to the heart.
Someone that can copy a comic book and put it onto film. Like, fuck, there's good shit out there. Like, don't reinvent the goddamn wheel. Like,
fucking 300 managed to pull it off. It's like, what the fuck?
Okay. So I'm going to throw out no more explanations. You just have to say remake it or don't remake it. You ready? I know we can go on, but I want to throw a few at you. Here we go.
What we do.
Jaws.
Don't remake it.
I don't know. You just thought it was safe to. You thought it was safe to go back with. No, why? You don't need to remake it.
Okay. Big Trouble, Little China.
Don't you dare.
Don't remake it, but like reboot it. Like make more.
Okay. Side note to that, so they talked about remaking it, and then they talked about doing the reboot, which had the expanded universe. I'm a big fan of that, so hopefully they will do that. But you never know.
Do you mean reboot or just continue? Like it in the future?
In the future, like almost like a sequel, like a part of the universe, like Big Trouble Trouble
Not
universe.
Changing anything that came before, but building on what came before. I'm for that.
Okay. They Live.
It's truer today than it was when it was made. It gets distilled more into truth in the world. It doesn't need to be remade. The world is remaking itself around They Live.
Nice.
I want to see a remake. I want to see. I think you could do it really well with modern special effects.
Walk over to your wall. Do good. Walk over to your wall. There's this thing called a window. Open it.
We're living the movie, is what he's saying. It's so funny. Because there are so many movies out there that it's just like, well, should we remake them? Should we not? Okay, here's the next one. Do you guys remember Goonies?
Yes. Love Goonies.
Love Goonies too. So should they remake Goonies? The pirates and the kids in the tunnel, and what do you think?
I don't think I'll like it no matter what. I think you can't recast Chunk for me.
Okay.
It's so well done.
Got it.
I think so, but someone younger with that's tied into the Stranger Things might be able to bridge the generation gap and make it work.
Interesting. So here's the question. Do you think Goonies won't work because that type of kid feel good movie ganging thing, it just won't work today, maybe?
No,
Not
I think
only
I'm saying that
but
Stranger Things has opened the door for it, that it could work if it's done right.
another problem is what parents nowadays let their kids just rip off on bike adventures near the ocean and all that other shit. Like the world is a bit of a different place, and you know, like, also, what kind of adventure would you be able to do if you couldn't just like pick up your phone and call your mom and be like, hey mom, there's these sketchy robber people down by the Pirate Cove hideout, and they'll just like send the police in, you know? Like, I think it was a movie for its time as well, and a certain adventure that could only happen because of the limits of its setting and age.
But you can still do something as a period piece too, right? You don't have to have
True.
everything set today. You can still do something as a period. That's what I'm saying. Stranger Things is a period piece, yet I think that kids today still get something out of it. Us old fucks can go back to the 80s things, but I think it was popular enough to young people that they still got it. So you can do it, and they don't have it. They're not making it in the modern world. I think you can do things that are period pieces and still work, right?
I'd be open to that, but it would for sure, like, it couldn't be like, you know, 2022 Goonies, like, fuck off.
Okay, here's one. Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
I would like to see a remake, only because I want to like, one of my favorite things about that movie was learning how to fake being sick and like get out of shit. I want to see the new tricks for that. You know?
Interesting. Jason?
I think it's still very watchable, enjoyable as is, so there's no need to remake it. But that's me, my age. Maybe someone younger would need a remake. I don't know.
And I would say that I don't think it should be remade, because that story is, because the world we live in, as Alex said, is different. So you would have to really change things, like skipping school and the ability and how easy it is to do, and go into the computer and change things. Like, all these things, it made sense back then, because I remember being in high school when it came out, right? It was like, it was that time, and I was like, oh, this is totally makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense in this world. So it would have to be a completely different story, but you'd be bastardizing the actual, you know, it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but it's like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Like, track him on his phone and we know where he is. Like, it's just, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, there's so many movies. So, okay, Alex, I'm gonna give it to you. Throw a couple movies out there, and Jason and I will say should be remade or shouldn't. Could be any movie.
Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy.
Don't touch it, because I may be alone in this, but I fucking hated the movies. They were these long, epic saga. I just did not like them, and I don't think it needs to be redone again. I'm like, oh my god. So
don't put you through that.
no, it's horrible. I'm not a Lord of the Rings fan. I have read the books. The books are better than the movies, but it was just, don't touch it.
Okay,
move on.
Jason, what do you think?
Open source it to fan edits. There's enough movie material there with re-edits, can be done brilliantly.
Interesting.
So you would want
you don't
to
need to re.
One.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you don't have to re-edit. There's enough footage there. Just fans creatively re-editing things and putting it in there can do amazing shit. And you know, a few little insert your scenes and stuff there, that you don't need to redo the whole thing, because they overdid the things enough that it's got the extras. Now the Silmarillion needs to be made, but anyway, that's a whole other topic that we don't have time for right now.
Okay, so the next one I'm going to throw out is the I guess they are making a remake or an add-on, but what about Dune, the original Dune? Would you remake that?
Okay, so I'm going to say yes. Jason and I love Dune, and so does Jason, so he can answer this too. So I'm going to say yes, you can remake it. I mean, I'm looking forward to the new film just to see how they do it, but you never know. So I say yes on that one.
Jason?
I want to see how this remake that is apparently done shows up. I want to see it on a big screen to see what they do. But I will also say that big fucking one that didn't get done with that brilliant documentary, and they've got that huge fucking book version of it. Publish that fucking book for fuck's sake, so that we can see the whole thing, and then get that one remade. And then again, you have to do the miniseries, because Dune is super expansive. There's tons of stuff going
I didn't
on,
know that.
and
You were telling me about that.
Yeah, the Dune is only the first book, which is the first part of anyway. Dune is a whole topic. I could go on forever about it, but you need to do like, and I know there was the mini series and stuff, but you need to keep going with. There's just so much more with Dune is super expansive. It's a whole topic.
Okay, sidebar to that, we are going to tackle a Dune episode because it does deserve its own Torvus episode. It is a remarkable work, and also remarkable film, like the first one. The reason it took so long, Alex, I think we've talked about this before, is because they didn't have the technology to do it. It was in development hell for a long time, and then finally in the 80s they're like, oh, we can do it now. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons.
So see that documentary if you haven't, Alex, you got it. It's like,
okay,
spiritual warriors, man. Okay,
the last one I'm gonna throw out to you guys is Demolition Man. Have you guys seen that?
Yes, I really like Demolition Man with Sylvester Stallone and
Wesley
Snipes. Hilarious, and I think it's hilarious too because of just how the cops were in the 21st century. They're like, so should they remake it? I'm going to say no. Because they did it to Judge Dredd, and Judge Dredd, the second one, sucked. And it's like, again, it's one of those like 80s films, 90s films. It's just like, you just leave it as it is. It doesn't need to be remade. Let me point out one thing before we actually do end off. When you think about remakes and reboots, there's so much material out there in the world of stories that are written that have been untouched and movies have not been made, and they can be made. And the problem is Hollywood is fucking lazy. So a lot of times they go back to stories they've already told because they knew they were money makers, and they retell them again. And this is what destroys our love for the movies or the series, because they're not risk takers, and they're not really researching. So when a new movie comes out with a new concept, fantastic, because someone did their homework.
Right. But just because Hollywood or someone modern makes a shitty version of something that they're trying to cash in on the name of, and if it sucks, that doesn't mean the idea sucks. You go back to what they're trying to rip off. They're trying to rip it off for a reason, because the original thing they're trying to rip off is good. So even if their thing sucks, go back to the thing they're trying to rip off, and you may find something good buried under that.
Yeah, Fantastic Four is the prime example of that, totally. Right? Like, it is an amazing story. Those characters are incredible, and like you said, like right now, everyone would say, "Oh, the Avengers is the biggest Marvel thing," but you're absolutely like Fantastic Four, like Reed Richards. He is like the flag holder for Marvel. I would argue.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. This was a fun one. It was all over the place, but it's what we do. So until next time, everyone, we do appreciate it. Remember, you can find us on the torvuspodcast.com, and that will link us to all the audio platforms out there. And we're also on YouTube as well. So until next time, everyone, keep on geeking on.
Geeking on.